Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the emotional habits that quietly destroy relationships episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are rebuilding their lives and relationships after breakup or divorce, helping them understand their relationship patterns, grow into the best version of themselves, and create deeper love and real connection, showing up differently for the next chapter of their lives so they can live the life they love. So this episode is a continuation of my series on becoming the man capable of a healthy relationship. In previous episodes, like what men were taught about strength that hurts relationships and how to handle conflict without destroying your connection, I explored the ways conditioning, emotional avoidance, and unhealthy communication can damage intimacy. But in this episode, I want to go even deeper, because sometimes it's not one big dramatic event that destroys relationships. It's not always cheating, abuse, or betrayal. Sometimes it's the emotional habits we carry into relationships every single day, habits we don't even recognize, that slowly erode trust, safety, intimacy, and connection over time. And the truth is, many men were never taught how to identify these emotional habits, much less how to change them, right? I was recently a guest on a podcast called The Mentor Sessions with host Big Mike. On the episode, I told my story of early childhood trauma and the impact it had on my relationships as an adult. 3 divorces, and now thriving with my wife for over 17 years. And as I explained the process I went through to heal and grow, Big Mike summed it up in a way that I'd never really seen before. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, something like, "It sounds like you had to tear down your old self and build yourself back up again." And honestly, that hit me, man, because I never thought about it that way before. But it was an excellent analogy. That's exactly what healing and growth often looks like. You slowly give up old habits that no longer serve you, and you learn healthier habits to replace them. You become a better version of yourself little by little. And for me, many of those old habits were emotional habits I didn't even realize were hurting my relationships until I did the work. Then through working with men over the years, I had another realization. I wasn't alone. Yeah, man, a lot of men bring emotional habits into relationships that quietly destroy them. And frankly, most of the men I work with do. One that comes to mind is Marty, not his real name. Marty was a good guy. He had good intentions, and he genuinely wanted a lasting relationship. He wanted marriage, the kids, the whole nine. The problem was that Marty couldn't maintain a relationship to save his life. His longest relationship lasted about 3 months. And as I got to know Marty and his story, I discovered he consistently brought 2 emotional habits into his relationships that caused them to end so fast. One was that he had to be right, no matter what. And that traced back to childhood and adolescence, where, in his father's words, he could never get anything right. So in adult relationships, Marty fought like hell to prove himself right, even to the point of gaslighting. Not intentionally, mind you, it's just how it played out. Now, the second emotional habit was that he couldn't regulate his emotions, especially anger. He carried years of resentment and unresolved anger toward his father. And during conflict in relationships, that anger would explode at his partners. He never became physically violent, but he would yell, storm out, shut down emotionally, and mope for days. It was the wounded little boy inside having a temper tantrum. When I helped Marty connect the dots back to the source of these emotional habits and helped him understand it really wasn't his fault, something shifted. Marty had carried shame for years. And to hear that it wasn't his little boy's fault, that his father's criticism without emotional support shaped him in painful ways, opened the door for change. And when Marty finally asked, "Bill, what do I have to do to move forward?" that's when the real work began. Marty was able to heal, grow, and develop healthier emotional habits that over time gave him the tools and supported the kind of relationship he always wanted. So, if you recognize some emotional habits you bring into relationships, maybe your question is the same as Marty's. What do I have to do to move forward? Or maybe you're wondering, how can I tell if my emotional habits are hurting my relationships? So let's talk about some of the most common emotional habits men bring into relationships, and what research tells us about where these habits often come from. The first emotional habit I'll talk about is defensiveness. Research from relationship expert Dr. John Gottman identifies defensiveness as one of the strongest predictors of relationship breakdown. And if you're wondering what defensiveness sounds like, it's often like, "That's not what I meant," or "You're too sensitive," or "You always blame me," and "Well, what about what you did?" Yeah, underneath that defensiveness is usually a lot of shame. Many men learned growing up that mistakes meant criticism, rejection, humiliation, or punishment. So instead of listening openly, they protect themselves. But the thing is, in relationships, defensiveness blocks accountability and emotional safety. Healthy relationships require emotional openness, not shutting down or guarding your emotions. The second emotional habit I'll talk about is emotional shutdown. A lot of men emotionally disappear during a conflict or an argument. They shut down, withdraw, go silent, they avoid hard conversations, or they numb themselves through distractions. And this is often rooted in attachment wounds and nervous system overwhelm or overload. Studies on attachment theory show that avoidant attachment patterns often develop in environments where emotional needs were dismissed, ignored, or criticized. So the adult learns emotions aren't safe. Connection feels overwhelming. I have to handle everything alone. And again, the thing is, emotional withdrawal leaves your partner feeling abandoned and disconnected, feeling alone. So it's important to understand that being present matters more than being perfect. Emotional habit number 3, anger as the only acceptable emotion. Yeah, man, a lot of men were taught that sadness is weakness, fear is weakness, vulnerability is weakness. But anger? No, man, anger was acceptable, right? The problem is that anger is often a secondary emotion, covering the softer side of anger, which could be pain, fear, shame, loneliness, rejection, or grief. Research in emotional regulation shows that men who suppress vulnerable emotions often experience increased emotional reactivity and conflict in relationships. In other words, the emotions don't disappear. They just come out sideways, right? And it makes a mess of everything. Number 4, emotional habit number 4, needing to be in control. Control, man, can show up in very subtle ways. You don't even realize it. I was called out on being in control, and I had no idea I was doing it. It can show up like always needing things done your way, correcting your partner constantly, struggling to compromise, micromanaging emotions or conversations, and becoming uncomfortable when it gets vulnerable. And feeling that need to be in control is often a way to create safety for yourself. Because when childhood environments felt unpredictable, critical, chaotic, or emotionally unsafe, controlling the situation became a survival strategy. And I know what that's like because I lived it. But the problem with that kind of control in relationships, it suffocates intimacy. And healthy love requires flexibility, trust, and I'll say it again, emotional safety. And the last emotional habit I'll talk about is avoiding vulnerability. Like I said, many men believe vulnerability makes them weak. But psychologically speaking, vulnerability is one of the strongest predictors of emotional intimacy and secure attachment. And without vulnerability, trust weakens, emotional connection fades, and partners often feel lonely even when they're together. Real strength is emotional honesty. Saying things like, I'm hurt, or I'm scared, I'm struggling here, I need support. And trust me on this, man, that is not weakness. That's emotional maturity. So I go back to Marty's question, how do you move forward? Well, the first step in all this is awareness. Simply said, you cannot change what you don't recognize. So once you recognize something's going on, that's your first step. The second step is curiosity instead of shame. Yeah, because a lot of these emotional habits were learned for survival. At one point in your life, they probably protected you. But what protected you as a child may be sabotaging your relationships as an adult. And the third step is digging in and doing the work, healing, learning emotional regulation, building self-awareness, practicing communication, developing healthier relationship skills, getting support when you need it. This is the work that changes lives. And again, I know this too, because I lived it myself. And I've watched a lot of men transform their relationships after learning how to replace destructive emotional habits with healthier ones. And listen, if you need support with your emotional habits, your relationship patterns, regulating your emotions, or just becoming the man capable of a healthy relationship, then please visit my website at menonthepathtolove.com. You'll find resources, coaching opportunities, and support right there at menonthepathtolove.com. That brings us to my quote of the week, which is from the famous American psychologist Carl Rogers. He says, quote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change," unquote. I'm using this quote because that connects to what Big Mike told me about tearing down the old and building the new. And Carl Rogers adds to that idea something really important, that you can't truly rebuild yourself until you first accept and understand the version of yourself you've been. Because a lot of men try to skip that step, and acceptance and awareness creates the foundation for transformation. And that will close out this episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the Emotional Habits That Quietly Destroy Relationships episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thank you so much for listening. You could have been doing 100 other things, and you chose to listen to this podcast, and I truly appreciate it. Now, coming up on the next episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, as I continue this series on becoming a man capable of a healthy relationship, I want to take a deeper dive into relationship skills. Now, in past episodes, like the skills that make or break a relationship that most men never learn, we explored the foundational skills men often miss growing up. But next time, I want to focus specifically on the relationship skills men often don't realize they need until their relationships are already falling apart. Because many men think that love alone is enough. All you need is love, right? But healthy relationships require emotional skills, communication skills, repair skills, listening skills, conflict skills, and self-awareness. And without those skills, even good men can unintentionally damage connection. So here's a question to think about until next time. What relationship skills do you wish someone had taught you earlier in life? Let that sink in and give it some thought. And please join me for the relationship skills most men realize they need until it's too late episode. And if this episode you're listening to right now resonated with you, then please share the link with someone who may need to hear it. Share the link and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.